The sun hovered lazily over a sprawling meadow, its light filtering through the leaves of an ancient oak tree. Beneath its shade, the world seemed calm, but for one creature, life was about to take a strange turn. A fly, small and unassuming, buzzed around with the chaotic precision typical of its kind. It darted from flower to flower, savoring the sweetness of nectar and the scent of the wild blooms. Its day began like any other, a routine dictated by nature's clock. On the other side of the meadow, however, lay an anomaly, a viscous pool of inky black substance that glistened unnaturally under the sun. It wasn't water, nor was it mud. The substance seemed alive, almost pulsating as if breathing in sync with an unseen rhythm. Nothing grew near it, no insects hovered around, and even the wind seemed to avoid disturbing its surface. It sat there, alien and foreboding, like a wound on the earth itself. The fly, oblivious to the unnatural air surrounding the pool, found itself drifting closer. The sweetness of the meadow began to wane, replaced by an odd metallic tang that carried on the air. Intrigued by the unfamiliar scent, the fly veered off course. Its tiny mind didn't process danger, only curiosity, as it landed precariously close to the pool's edge. The black goo rippled slightly, as though acknowledging the presence of this insignificant visitor. For a moment, nothing happened. The fly skittered along the edge, its legs sticking slightly to the surface with each step. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, it slipped into the goo. The liquid swallowed it whole with an eerie silence, leaving no ripple or trace of the event. The meadow grew still once more. Inside the goo, the fly experienced something beyond comprehension. Its body was encased in the blackness, but it wasn't drowning. Instead, an overwhelming sensation of heat and cold surged through its tiny form, alternating in an unbearable rhythm. The goo wasn't just a liquid. It was a substance imbued with intent, a creation of unfathomable origin and purpose. The fly's simple mind expanded as the substance seeped into it, filling every fiber of its being with knowledge it could neither process nor escape. Time lost meaning, stretching into an eternity of incomprehensible sensations. When the fly emerged, it was no longer the creature it had been. Its small body, though still recognizable, had undergone a grotesque transformation. Its wings shimmered with an iridescent black hue, and its legs had grown spindly, each tipped with barbed appendages. But the most striking change was in its eyes. Once dull and compound, they now gleamed with an unnatural intelligence, as if they held galaxies within them. The fly's first instinct was to take flight, and it did so with a grace it had never possessed before. It zipped through the air, faster and more precise than any of its kind. Its vision was no longer limited to the immediate. It could see distances unimaginable, perceive the tiniest movements in the grass below, and sense the pulse of life around it. But there was something else, a hunger that gnawed at its core, a need for something beyond the nectar of flowers. As it soared over the meadow, the fly's newfound awareness began to comprehend the world differently. It could feel the connections between living things, the invisible threads of energy that bound all creatures together. This realization filled it with an inexplicable drive, a purpose it didn't understand but couldn't ignore. The black goo hadn't just transformed its body. It had imbued it with an alien consciousness and a mission. The first sign of its hunger came when it encountered a bee. The bee, diligently gathering pollen, paid no attention to the fly until it was too late. With a speed that defied nature, the fly lunged at the bee, its barbed legs piercing the creature's exoskeleton. The bee struggled, its movements frantic but futile. The fly's barbs seemed to draw more than physical sustenance. They drained something deeper, an essence that left the bee lifeless and empty. The fly's hunger subsided momentarily, but the act left it unsettled. It wasn't feeding in the traditional sense, it was consuming existence itself. As days turned into weeks, the fly's presence began to alter the meadow. The vibrant ecosystem, once teeming with life, grew eerily quiet. Flowers wilted, their colors fading into dull shades, and the buzzing of insects diminished until only the fly's haunting hum remained. The transformation was subtle at first, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The black goo's influence was spreading, carried by the fly as it ventured farther from the pool. In a nearby forest, a group of researchers had been studying the area's unique biodiversity. Among them was Dr. Elena Harper, a biologist with a keen eye for patterns in nature. She was the first to notice the sudden decline in insect populations and the strange discoloration of plants. Intrigued and alarmed, she led her team to investigate the source of the phenomenon. Their journey took them to the meadow and, eventually, to the pool of black goo. The researchers approached the pool cautiously, their scientific curiosity tempered by an instinctual unease. Instruments detected unusual energy readings emanating from the goo, readings that defied any known physical laws. Dr. Harper knelt by the edge, her gloved hand reaching out to collect a sample. As she dipped the container into the substance, a ripple spread across its surface, and for a brief moment, the goo seemed to react, as if aware of her presence. Unbeknownst to the team, the fly had been watching them from the shadows. Its altered mind recognized the humans as something different, something powerful yet vulnerable. The hunger stirred again, but this time it was coupled with a sense of caution. The fly knew it couldn't attack directly. It needed to learn to understand these creatures before acting. That night, as the researchers set up camp near the meadow, the fly began its observation. It moved silently, its enhanced vision and senses allowing it to study their every action. The humans' technology fascinated it, their tools and devices emitting signals that resonated with the strange energy within its body. The fly's alien consciousness began piecing together fragments of understanding, drawing connections between the human's activities and its own existence. Dr. Harper's notes became increasingly filled with descriptions of the goo's properties. It wasn't just a substance. It was a form of life, a biomechanical entity that could assimilate and transform organic matter. She theorized that it was not of this world, a hypothesis that sent ripples of excitement and fear through the team. They didn't realize that their discovery had already drawn the attention of something far more dangerous. As the days passed, the fly grew bolder. It began to sabotage the researchers subtly, tampering with their equipment and contaminating their samples. Its actions sowed confusion and tension among the team, but it wasn't enough to drive them away. The fly's hunger had evolved into something more complex. It wasn't just consuming life, but feeding on fear and discord. The turning point came when one of the researchers, a young entomologist named Marcus, decided to stay up late to analyze a sample under the microscope. He worked alone in the dimly lit tent, his focus entirely on the slide before him. He didn't notice the fly until it was too late. It descended silently, its barbed legs piercing his neck. Marcus froze, his body convulsing as the fly fed. But this time, the act wasn't just about sustenance. The fly injected something into him, a fragment of the black goo's essence, and then retreated into the night. Marcus survived the attack but was irrevocably changed. His colleagues noticed the shift immediately. His demeanor grew cold and detached, his eyes taking on an unnatural sheen. He spoke less, and when he did, his words carried an unsettling weight. Dr. Harper grew increasingly alarmed, suspecting that Marcus's exposure to the goo had caused more than a physical reaction. One night, as the team debated their next course of action, Marcus abruptly stood and walked out into the meadow. The others followed, their concern overriding their fear. They found him kneeling by the black goo, his hands submerged in its depths. The substance swirled around him, climbing his arms like living tendrils. He turned to face them, his expression void of humanity, and spoke in a voice that was not his own. "It's not just a substance," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "It's a doorway." Before anyone could react, the goo erupted from the pool, engulfing Marcus and spreading across the meadow with alarming speed. The researchers ran, but the fly was waiting. It intercepted them, its grotesque form blocking their path. In the chaos that followed, only Dr. Harper managed to escape, her mind reeling from the horrors she had witnessed. The fly, now fully consumed by the alien consciousness, watched as the black goo spread, consuming everything in its path. The meadow, once a haven of life, became a desolate wasteland, a precursor to the greater transformation that was to come. The fly had become more than a creature. It was a harbinger, a vessel for an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. And as it took to the skies once more, it carried with it the promise of an unfolding nightmare.